Hello and welcome to Ildefonso Inc. Today I'm joined by composer Robert Wolf. Robert, how are you doing today?
Good. I'm in the studio, just a normal day at work, and I'm happy to do this interview.
Yeah, well, why don't you talk a little bit about the studio and the work? Like, are you in the space in LA right now that this is kind of like your office, essentially?
Yeah, so we have like a full studio space here with like a lot of different rooms. Most of them have the same setup as I have here with like sound treatment and stuff. And yeah, everybody has their own designated room. So I have all my stuff here. I have a couple instruments that I use, and but it's also quite handy because my boss is next door, or like my colleagues are next door, and so I can get feedback very easily and maybe borrow instruments from other people. And yeah, definitely has its advantages.
Yeah, I mean, it's a unique setup. When I first found out about Hexany, I was looking at the site, and you don't see a lot of larger scale audio teams with composers in-house. Mm-hmm. So how does a week look like for you as a composer on a team? Because like you said, you guys have multiple different kinds of stages. So are you in your room? Are you staying in there with the mix, or is the mix moving to a different room? How does that all work?
Yeah, so it's mostly everything we do is like based on our room that we work in. The good thing is everybody has the same setup pretty much, so we all have the same speakers, and the rooms are all set up in a way that like my mix, hopefully, fingers crossed, would sound very much the same in a different room here. And then we have one room that's fully Dolby Atmos. So if a client that asks for like a Dolby Atmos mix or something like that, we can move over there and get it mixed there. So far, that doesn't really happen as much with music. So I would mostly finish up my own mixes and then maybe get feedback from colleagues. And yeah, so yeah, it pretty much all happens in the same room, unless I have sometimes I'll have like live orchestral recordings. Then it would mostly be in a remote session where I record a string section or something, or say my colleagues, I might ask someone to contribute, a guitar solo or something like that. And then the session gets opened in a different room. They can record there, and then I can pull it back over here. So, yeah.
Yeah. As far as your DAW goes, like where are you recording your sessions into? Is this Pro Tools based?
Yeah. We the whole music team here works in Pro Tools. That's how the company got started, and it's also really easy with integrating recording sessions. Like when I get recording sessions back from the studio, I just like pull those tracks in. So it's really easy to integrate the live recording sessions into our existing sessions. And then also we have it set up in such a way that like everything is standardized. So like every other composer in the company can open the same sessions on their own rig. Wow. In their own rooms. So say if I'm like, I get the flu and I have to stay home, but the track is due, then in those cases, my colleague would be able to open it on their rig and just finish the track or something. Or also for collaborating, it's really, really useful. Like I might just send it over to them and they, record a line on an instrument that they play and I don't play or something like that. So it's useful for switching back and forth like that. Yeah.
That is awesome. So then as far as computer rig goes, are you guys running PC or are you guys running Macs?
Both. So we run Macs in our studio. Like, so behind my screens here is a Mac. And then the samples are all hosted of a VE Pro on a server rack. And so, that also makes it easy to like standardize everything, like everybody has the same sample setup. And so they get automatically updated by like separate from me. Like I don't have to deal with that. So it's all like, yeah, it's a bit of, a bit of work to get it all set up and get it running correctly. But once it runs, ideally, everybody can open the sessions everywhere else, and it makes it more streamlined. But yeah, then we usually like have to coordinate a little bit more of like when do we run an update or something like that,
Right.
right? Because like it would get beamed out to all of the different systems, and so you don't want to have something block the whole music team. So it's usually
Right.
a bit of
Right.
a situation to figure out if something breaks something else. Yeah.
I know. I could only imagine with all of the sample libraries, every plugin has its own launcher now. There's cloud updates, the interfaces. Like, what are you guys using for your interfaces?
So the what is it called? The we just upgraded to the Neve
Oh, okay.
interfaces, the small ones with I think has 4 channels.
Oh,
I don't
cool.
have one of those, so I don't know. I have a
Right.
Motu. I have a Tascam Model 12, so one of
Okay.
these mixers, like analog digital hybrid mixer, because
Hmm.
I do record a lot of instruments, so I usually have like 2 or 4 channels set up with microphones ready to record. But I also have a lot of synthesizer gear and pedals and stuff like that. So I have all of that wired up. And so if,
Hmm.
because the challenge for a while was like if I switch, say, between like a synthesizer heavy track and a, orchestral track, then I have to like replug the cables to connect my
Hmm.
synthesizers and stuff. And it was just like, just 2 or 4 inputs is just not enough for me on an interface. So I just went with the mixer instead, and it's been really good. But yeah, most of the other composers have like interfaces with maybe 2 or 4 inputs. Yeah.
Yeah, because so then let's talk a little bit about the microphones then that you're using, because my introduction to you is more of in the fantasy space where you're using orchestral, but there's something about your arrangements. I just feel like there's live instrumentation somewhere in that process. So at least for the stuff that you're engineering yourself in your room, what kind of microphones are you drawn to?
So we have also again standardized setup here. So all of the composers have the C414 microphones. So we have a pair. I usually have them set up here for stereo recording. And then if I record just a flute, I would just turn on one of the microphones, but I'll still leave it as is. So to just like standardize it as much as possible, because like for a track, like you said, we would record a lot. So like I play a lot of different instruments. Like I have a bunch of instruments laying around, like flutes and whatnot, and percussion instruments and stuff. And depending on the track, I'd record maybe a couple different flutes, like, 3, 4, maybe different tracks of percussion instruments, depending on what a track needs. And then if we have more specific, like nobody here can play like violin or something good enough that we would be able to record that. So sometimes we like outsource it and get soloists to perform on it. And then obviously some tracks have full orchestral recording and we mix that in. But we do a lot of recording in-house. Most of the time we add some kind of guitar in the background, or guitars we usually record ourselves. Any kind of flute. I play the accordion as well, saxophone, all kinds of different instruments as much as we can. I really like that about the job, to just add as much life flavor as possible to a track.
Yeah, it just feels like the moment a composer or a musician or a creative like gets to play with all the samples, at least the way it works in my brain is I start going, okay, but now can I do this without samples? And it's like the challenge is always there. It's either to nail a great orchestral sample and get it to sound real. And then also I feel like the natural tendency is to want to own a little bit more of an arrangement. So when you get a project and you're starting, do you map it out with MIDI first and then kind of add the color in with the live instrumentation?
Yeah, so So maybe how I would usually work on a track. Say I get like we usually get like a client pitch, so it would be some kind of Excel sheet or something with the overview of like some kind of game character or something. So it would be a bit of the background story laid out there, and maybe reference tracks and kind of stylistic ideas of how intense the track should be, or if it's a main theme or if it's background music, stuff like that. And then I would usually go and start with a piano sketch. So this is a little bit different for every composer, but I tend to go to a piano sketch first and really sketch out a track, or at least a pretty big portion of the track, just to have kind of a roadmap of what I want to do. And then go on from there. Like sometimes I'd even discuss the piano sketch with colleagues and be like, what do you think about this? And because they can usually imagine what will this sound like with an orchestra, right? And then the other thing is some tracks require like very specific instruments. Like clients will literally tell us like, we want this very specific flute, or we want this very specific percussion instrument, And so then my main challenge is usually like either finding a good sample that actually works for this to really make it like the main feature of the track, or literally going out and buying that instrument, like getting my hands on an instrument, at least an instrument that comes pretty close to what the client wants, and trying to learn it, and trying my best to play melodies, and so then at the sketching stage, I would sometimes already record the live instrument, just because sometimes that informs for me the writing process, right? If you play a certain flute, it will lead you to write melodies a certain way that on a piano, I probably would write them differently. So I really enjoy that process of also writing with the instrument that it's intended for, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So then when you work inside of MIDI for these piano sketches, do you have certain kind of virtual instruments that you find yourself gravitating towards? Do you keep it the same when you're doing your piano sketches, just to keep the tech side of it like as cohesive, just so you're not like running into issues with a new library, or do you use that as a discovery process? Like when you're sketching something out through MIDI, are you like trying new things, or is the idea to keep that sketch as simple as possible on the technical side?
I would say keep it simple on the technical side, because like, I mean, it depends on the track, of course, but let's say like a typical orchestral track, I would treat the piano sketch more as really like a blueprint of what my track should end up being, right? So I almost don't want the piano to sound super amazing by itself, because it's like that's not going to be the sound of it, right? Unless the piano is going to be in the final track, but most of the time we're just going to replace it with orchestral instruments. And so I just use the same patch. I forgot what exact piano it is, but it's an unimpressive, just a normal piano sketch that's preloaded into our template, just to get started as quickly as possible. And then I feel like the experimentation is a bit more when you try to hit a very specific thing. Like I said, like if you want to incorporate a specific instrument or something, sometimes you have to like structure the track around that feature instrument, right? And so then I would maybe start recording live instruments on top of the piano sketch to just see how will that change my piano sketch potentially. Yeah. And then I often keep updating the piano sketch whenever I make changes, to just basically have this be my roadmap of what's happening in the track. Yeah.
And then as far as when you're blending in your live, like say you played a flute and you're going to blend that in with some samples from your sketch, or even as you're starting to develop out more of the sample library stuff and the MIDI stuff, like do you have plugins that you tend to use to help bridge the gap from the audio source that you recorded with the sample library? Like, is there reverbs that you're drawn to, or do you find that you're generally adding some kind of compression or some kind of EQ to help like join those two worlds together?
Yeah, so I'm going to keep saying this, but like we try to have a pretty streamlined process with these things. So again, there I would usually have my tracks already preloaded, like just say like solo 1, solo 2. It's just meant for like two flutes. Most of the time it's flutes that are in a prominent role on top of the track. And so they would usually have like a Pro Q3 already on it with like some presets. And so honestly, most of the time I'm going to record it and melodyne it. And then it's usually good to go because it will run in our template. It will run in the same reverb chain that we have for all of the other samples. So sometimes I'll add a bit more reverb depending on what kind of effect I want. If the instrument is like really prominent, you probably don't want to like drown it into reverb too much. But if it's more like a textural thing, like sometimes I create more like with, like a delay or a reverb, create more like these background textures. Then I would maybe add a bit more. But blending it with the rest of the orchestra happens by just having it go through the same reverb chain as my sampled woodwinds and my sampled strings would go. Yeah.
And yeah, do you have a specific reverb that you are drawn to as of late with your sessions? Or is there like, it sounds like there's probably one that's just loaded in right away.
Yeah, that's a great question. What is actually loaded into it's the thing hidden in our reverb chain. Let me open this one and see. Yeah, I mean, the ones that I load on top of things are often just to give things a more unique, a more specific flavor. I really like plate reverbs. The Soundtoys Super Plate is something I tend to add to a lot of things, especially when it comes to synthesizers. Just sounds really good. And then on flutes, lately I've been trying more the Valhalla Shimmer reverb to just like draw the live recorded winds out a little bit more, but it can also easily sound like too much because it's a very prominent kind of slightly fake sounding effect. But it can sometimes be the right thing to like blend it in a bit more. But that's only on top of the reverb that we already have set up. And sometimes if I want a really natural sound, I'll just keep it as it is. And yeah.
So then, that we were talking a little earlier, and the project that I discovered you through was Passageway of the Ancients. And that's a retro style computer role-playing game. When you approach a project like that, what does your week typically look like? You start with the piano draft, you start working in the samples, you start doing the leads. Do you go one track per week, or do you just start drafting all of the tracks and then you start moving them all forward at the same time? Or how do you typically like to approach that?
Yeah, so with this project, it was a little bit different because normally we work on existing franchises and games that keep on going and going. So my music would usually like have to tie into a bigger kind of world of music that already exists for a game, like Honor of Kings or something like that. And with this game, it was kind of unique because we got the whole chunk of music to do ourselves. So I did most of the music for this game. So in this case, I could like start from scratch and be like, what do I want this whole game to sound like? So we have this kind of task system set up, and I would basically see all of the tracks that I'll have to finish by a certain deadline. And then I just choose which one I want to start with. Obviously, main theme was kind of the thing to start with, but it's also sometimes good to write something else first to get into it a bit more. And then, it's pretty straightforward. I usually do a 1-minute demo for a track first, get that approved by the client. If the track is longer than a minute, obviously, if it's just a minute, often it's just a minute loop or something, then we'll get that approved. And in this case, it was really cool because a lot of creative freedom, and I got a lot of descriptions for the different levels that need music. And in some cases, I was also given freedom to decide, do we want to have 1 or 2 tracks for this level, or like how do we want to separate it? So very fun, and just trying to imagine what this world would sound like. The different levels, the different shops. We wrote some music for the little shopping areas in the town and stuff. Yeah, very, very cool experience to just start from scratch and imagine what this whole world would sound like. And yeah, then pretty much just go and start with a piano sketch, record some stuff. It was a little bit different because some of the tracks were more like small ensemble medieval style music, right? So in those cases, I would probably not start with a piano sketch because that just doesn't really feel like the right thing to do for me. Like sometimes just like turn a click on and maybe improvise a little tune on you know, on the accordion or on the tin whistle or a recorder or something, and then have that kind of as a starting point to maybe add drums, guitar to it. So there was a lot of live instruments recorded for that. And sometimes when you write for a small ensemble like that, it just more like having a jam session with yourself in a way, and just adding more and more until it feels complete. Yeah.
Yeah. And then as you're like wrapping up the project, do you start approaching the file delivery in a way that's specific to games, or is it just simply waves and then it's on to the next team member at Hexany, or it goes to the developer?
Yeah, so that would depend on if we implement the music as well. I'm not sure if we did. I don't think we did the implementation on this one. But I could be wrong. I think we didn't do it. So in that case, I would just send my music first to my boss, get it approved by my boss. If he thinks this sounds great, then we're going to send it to the client. Hopefully the client will approve it as well. And then they implement it into the game. And at some point, in this case, we also compiled the soundtrack for it. So that was a cool experience too, because I was able to decide which tracks can go together well, how I want to like structure the album and stuff, like all stuff that like most of the time the game company would do, or like put their own compilation together. So kind of fun to get to do that side as well. And obviously my colleagues also had, they wrote a lot of music for this game as well. So that was also a great process for them to listen to the music that I've done, and then me listening to what they're doing, and bring that all together in the end in the form of the soundtrack.
Rad. Well, yeah, no, that's all really helpful. And I think I have a much better picture of how you kind of approach the process and how you're probably able to continue writing prolifically as projects come in, because there is a structure and there is a flow, and you're able to like adapt to the brief, but also not spend too much time restarting the process from scratch, you know, like allowing yourself to focus on the music more than a Pro Tools template or deciding what sampler to open for the day. So no, that really helps. And if people want to listen to your music and find your work on the internet, where would you point them to? Yeah, so I have a personal website, wolf-music.com, and then we have the Hexany website, hexanyaudio.com. So Hexany Audio would be the website for all of the stuff we do here. And I'm not sure if the soundtrack is linked on there yet, but that should also happen. And yeah, that would be the ways to listen to our music. Right. Well, thanks so much for hopping on and chatting about your process and the music. So yeah, thank you guys for watching this interview, and we will see you guys all next time. Later. Thank you. Bye.